And what we're trying to avoid is for your voice to change into a squeaking old door or a crow or Captain Janeway. We're trying to avoid that. Vigorous Steve here. Let's discuss non-virilizing performance-enhancing drugs which I feel are safe, or at least reasonably safe, for women. Now, this is not based on my personal experience because I'm obviously not a woman, but I've coached many a woman over the years, including my wife. So I'm going to discuss what I've observed with female clients or my wife over the last couple of years. And when I say reasonably safe, I mean that in the following way. Because particular anabolic androgenic steroids, which are used by women in general, are safe up until a particular dose, after which virilization starts to manifest, or you have an increased risk for virilization because the compound is no longer tissue selective. When I say tissue selective, I mean selective on the skeletal muscle. And there's also a exposure duration, which comes with each compound separately. So some anabolic androgenic steroids, for example, you only have an exposure window of up to 10 weeks. And that's an exposure window of 10 weeks based on a lifetime. So that's a total exposure window of 10 weeks, for example. Right? So that means that you get to use these particular compounds for maybe 2 weeks on end, 10 days on end, leading into a contest. And cumulatively, when you've reached this 10-week mark, 70-day mark, it's very likely that you will still get virilization because it's the overall exposure to a particular compound that builds up over time. So I'm not saying that you can run these compounds safely 10 weeks straight without virilization. There might be a time and place for 10 days, 14 days with 6 months, 9 months break in between, after which you can expose yourself to a compound for 10 days, 14 days again. But still, over time, let's say 7 successions of those exposures over the course of a couple of years, virilization might still manifest. So you have to keep that in mind. Please, ladies, keep that into consideration. Just because it's safe up until 10 days, 14 days, now, over time, it will add up, it will build up. And what we're trying to avoid is for your voice to change into a squeaking old door or a crow or Captain Janeway. We're trying to avoid that. If anything, we're trying to use performance-enhancing drugs to get a very pleasing, cosmetically good-looking physique without a voice that is not very representative of a good state of health, right? We're trying to avoid that. And I've seen it happen around me so much over the last couple of years. Luckily, I was able to avoid that with my wife completely. There's no virilization there. I didn't change her voice. We didn't do anything exciting. She didn't lose a period, right? I think we were very successful in reaching a very competitive physique without any of these virilization nonsense that a lot of women are willing to subject themselves to nowadays. I see that a lot around my direct field here in Thailand. A lot of women that changed their voice with horrible performance-enhancing drug selection because the boyfriend designed it for them, or their coach, which is unknowing, designed that for them. Really, it's the amount of women that really designed their stacks intelligently is very spaced and far and few between. So hopefully this video can set some of you girls up for better drug selection in the future, because you want to look good in the near future, but you also want to look and sound good in the late future, right? When you're probably done with competing, or when you're done actively trying to pursue a fitness career, you still want to sound and look feminine. So we're trying to avoid all these virilizing side effects like voice changes, clitoral growth, even though some women actually enjoy that, and there's probably a market for clitoral growth as well. For the girls that are actively trying to avoid that, stick around. This video will contain everything that you need to know to prevent that from manifesting. And then, of course, there's acne and hair loss or hair growth in particular places. We're going to discuss everything that you need to know to avoid any of these virilizing side effects. So let's just start there. Let's go over the compounds which I feel are not safe, or at least safe with a very short window of drug exposure. I don't feel that Primobolan acetate tablets are safe because the tablets are 25 milligrams. I believe in Japan they have 5 milligram Bayer acetate tablets. Now, of course, the 25 milligram tablets you could split into 12.5 milligrams or 6.25 milligrams. That might be at least safer than starting off with 25 milligrams Primobolan acetate per day. It's way too much. Maybe experiment with 6.25 milligrams Primobolan acetate the last 2 weeks leading into a photo shoot or a contest prep, right? You can expose yourself to Primobolan acetate or Winstrol or even some of the other compounds that we tend to use as bodybuilders in the same fashion that you would do, that the men do with halotestin at the end, halotestin and Superdrol combination. You'll be able to do a similar exposure method when it comes to Primobolan acetate plus Anavar. Anavar is, I feel, reasonably safe to run for prolonged periods of time, given that the dose is extremely conservative, which we'll discuss later in the safe, non-virilizing performance-enhancing drug section of this video. But when it comes to Primobolan acetate, a low dose of 6.25 milligrams for 10 days, 14 days in duration, when already low body fat, when already in shape, for a short window of time where it's actually required to be in absolutely phenomenal shape, again, that being the photo shoot or the contest that you're preparing for. And within 10 to 14 days, if you're really in good shape, if you're in peak physical conditioning, 6.25 milligrams Primobolan acetate, maybe 12.5 milligrams. Again, that's at the higher levels. That's a figure or athletic physique. At the higher levels, you might be able to increase the dose, maybe even 25 milligrams Primobolan acetate. But for bikini, for a recreational lifter, I don't think it's required. Really, you can get very good results with some of the non-virilizing performance-enhancing drugs that I consider to be safe, which we'll discuss a little bit later in this video. If you're a woman that cares about her femininity, I would avoid Primobolan acetate altogether. And if you do consider it, limit the exposure to a very low dose for 10 days, 14 days consecutively at best. And then again, after you've reached that 10-week mark, even then 6.25 milligrams Primobolan acetate might slowly result in virilization. And it's the same with Winstrol. You can use that in a similar fashion leading into a photo shoot or a contest. 10 milligrams or 5 milligrams twice per day at the last 10 days or 14 days. And that's it. That's more than enough time to change your appearance cosmetically, but it's not enough time to result in virilization. Now, if you use 10 milligrams Winstrol every day for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 16 weeks straight, virilization will manifest hands down. Again, Primobolan acetate and Winstrol, very short duration windows are acceptable, but the virilization will add up over time. So please keep that in mind. They're not safe for continuous use unless it's into a contest prep with a couple days before. And what you might have heard online is that SARMs are safe for women, which I don't really agree with, simply because the data is not there. Now, SARMs have not passed clinical trials yet, or they're still undergoing clinical trials. Some of them have already been abandoned. So that's the Ostarine, the LGD, the YK11, the S4, right? All the selective androgen receptor modulators, which potentiate anabolism through the androgen receptor. They might still change hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis function. So you see that testosterone levels decline. You see that estradiol concentrations decline, even though you're carefully trying to reach or maintain estrogen balance within the body with a copper IUD or diethylmethane or calcium diglucarate, which we discussed in the previous video. You can watch that here if you haven't already. Now, I do feel that some of the compounds which are classified as SARMs, but are not actually SARMs, so we're talking about the metabolic modulators like GW1516, SR9009, or MK677, classified as SARMs, but they don't potentiate any effects through the androgen receptor. They're metabolic modulators. They might act as an anti-catabolic agent, which could be beneficial during a contest prep or cutting phase because they shift the energy production from glucose, glycogen into fatty acids, or they liberate fatty acids, and they raise growth hormone concentrations, which inherently helps with fat loss as well, right? But unfortunately, MK677 Also raises appetite quite significantly. So I would always favor growth hormone over MK677. So we're going to forego those compounds which are classified as SARMs in this scenario. And when it comes to the SARMs that potentiate their effects to the androgen receptor, just to play it safe, I would advise all the women out there just to avoid them for now, until some of the SARMs have passed clinical trials and they're available as a pharmaceutical, right? And then at least you have the confirmation that these SARMs underwent third-party testing, and they have particular guidelines that these companies need to adhere to. They're produced under United States Pharmacopoeia with good manufacturing processes. And unfortunately, up until now, the reputation of some SARM companies might be good, but it's still underground labs. It's still gray area supplementation. So there's no third-party quality control. Does the Ostarine actually contains Ostarine? And if it contains Ostarine, does it contain 10 milligrams of Ostarine per capsule? And even then, 10 milligrams of Ostarine might be too much. It might lose its tissue selectivity, and you might be able to get good effects with 5 milligrams of Ostarine, assuming that the Ostarine is dosed accurately. And that's another huge issue with gray area supplementation, is that a lot of these SARMs are produced in capsules, not in tablets. With a tablet, just like pharmaceuticals, you can break a tablet in half. The majority of the tablets that you buy as a pharmaceutical have a score line. You can break it in half and you can bet your lift and right butt cheek on it that half the tablet contains half the dose, because the active pharmaceutical ingredient is dispersed uniformly inside the tablet. Now, since there's no third-party testing, you can't say the same thing for an underground lab that produces in tablets. And unfortunately, with the capsules, it's a bit of an issue as well, because if you want half the dose or a quarter of the dose, which is contained within the capsules, you'll have to suspend that powder in water or Everclear and then dose that with a syringe, for example. I've had to tell that to a couple of my clients as well. Listen, the dose is way too high. We're going to suspend the powder in a solution in Everclear or something else which has benzyl alcohol or alcohol, so it remains sterile. And then you have to dose that with a syringe at a quarter of cc per time to get a quarter of the dose. It's a little bit more cumbersome. There's always ways around it. But as a woman, if you really value your femininity and you're trying to prevent virilization, even when the evidence comes out that Ostarine, LGD, YK11, or S4 is tissue selective, so that's on skeletal muscle and not the androgen receptors on other tissues of the body, resulting in virilization. Let's say up until 5 milligrams is tissue selective and there's no risk for virilization. Wait until there's pharmaceutical Ostarine or YK11 or S4 or LGD or whatever, right? Wait until there's a pharmaceutical produced in tablet form with a score line that you can break and take half the dose or a quarter of the dose, so you don't have to resort to breaking open capsules and suspending that in Everclear and go through that cumbersome route, assuming, fingers crossed, that the Ostarine is actually Ostarine and accurately dosed as is described on the packaging. And as of now, unfortunately, as far as I know, there's no LabMax or Roy test kit available that can detect which particular SARM is contained within a capsule. So again, that will be a third-party testing method, which is beneficial to test whether anabolic androgenic steroids contain the active pharmaceutical ingredient. The limitation with those kits is that they can't determine the dosing. So you would need to send it in to janoschnik.com. I'll list it down below in case I butchered the name. Janoschnik, you can send in samples and have them analyze it. It's not cheap. It will set you back a little bit financially, but hey, it's still better than running the risk of virilization, which in some cases is irreversible, right? So I would always do the lab testing. Whether you're going to use SARMs or anabolic androgenic steroids, use a LabMax or a Roy test kit, or send it in to Janoschnik or another website where you can do third-party testing, just to make sure the purity, the dosing, and the active pharmaceutical ingredient is as labeled, right? So that kind of discussed the SARMs. I would just avoid them altogether to be safe. And again, maybe when new data comes out that these SARMs are actually tissue selective up until a particular dose, then you can consider it. But until that time comes, Anavar is tissue selective up until a certain dose as well. And when I compare Anavar to Ostarine and S4 at least, in cases of men or women, Anavar wins hands down on a milligram for milligram basis when it comes to overall anabolism and when it comes to least amount of changes in blood work parameters. Now with YK11, I'm not really sure, and with LGD, I'm not really sure either. But at least in case of Ostarine and S4, I feel that Anavar on a milligram for milligram basis is superior. And again, if YK11 or LGD turn out to be superior compared to Anavar, it probably also comes with a little bit more virilization potential. So again, avoid them for now, please. There are much more suitable options out there, or at least options that you can consider before you actually require to resort to SARMs in the future when you feel you've reached a threshold of gains on the other compounds, which I feel are reasonably safe for women to use. Now, what women should also avoid are just all of the injectables. All of them. The Nandrolone, the Boldenone, the Primobolan, the Trembolone, hands down. Now, there might be some, and the Winstrol, of course, but it's always available as a tablet form, and women don't really require to run higher dosages of Winstrol, so I don't see why women would want to run Winstrol unless they're competing at a very high level in the figure class or the athletic physique class. And then it might be required, but I think the virilization issue is kind of off the table because you're competing in a class where virilization might be required to win, unfortunately, unless you have awesome genetics. But from what I've seen, even the girls with awesome genetics, they still run virilizing compounds just to ensure that they're getting the win. All right, so that off the table, injectable compounds like Boldenone, Primobolan Acetate, or Primobolan Acetate, which is very, very painful. I even tell my male clients to avoid it. Injectable Winstrol, injectable Trembolone, avoid that at all costs unless you're doing bodybuilding. Injectable Masterone. I mean, it was pulled off the market to help resolve breast cancer for a reason. There are much more suitable approaches nowadays, like selective estrogen receptor modulators, for example. Masterone I would avoid. And Proviron is basically never safe for women because it lowers sex hormone binding globulin and it raises the free androgen index in the bloodstream. And now the overall burden for the same dose of Anavar, potentially, or a little bit of DHEA, or exogenous testosterone therapy, which might be something to say for that. As soon as you add in the Proviron, free androgen index goes up, free testosterone concentrations go up, and you risk the potential for virilization on the same dose of Anavar or DHEA or exogenous testosterone, which would otherwise be safe because a decent portion of that is bound up in the sex hormone binding globulin, which potentiates anabolism through a different pathway. So keep that in mind. Proviron is never safe for women. I know some coaches are recommending it. I would do 180 and run away screaming. But hey, right? Not everybody is as informed. Now, when it comes to exogenous testosterone, it's something that might be safe for women that are a little bit older in the form of hormone replacement therapy. And then we're talking about 5 milligrams testosterone if that's injectable 3 times per week. That's a replacement dose where you see that testosterone concentrations in the bloodstream get somewhere towards the top of the reference range on 5 milligrams, perhaps 10 milligrams testosterone enanthate or cypionate intramuscularly or subcutaneously 3 times per week. I know some women that like 15 milligrams of testosterone enanthate. I did not observe any virilization. But again, over time, I'm sure that anything higher than a replacement dose of testosterone to bring testosterone to the top of the reference range will result in virilization. Now, I've seen elevated testosterone concentrations on my wife's blood work for years. Right? Her testosterone concentrations are slightly elevated. They might be 75, sometimes even 100 nanograms per deciliter. So that's slightly over the reference range. My wife does not experience any virilization from an endogenous testosterone level that's higher than average. Now, that might work for her because her androgen receptors are handling that supraphysiological dose of testosterone a little bit differently. Again, she's not using any exogenous testosterone. She just has higher testosterone levels. I've seen that with a cutter apple women as well. They don't have any virilization, but I know women that have low testosterone concentrations, they go on exogenous testosterone, they raise their testosterone to the top of the reference range, and they get virilization. Is that the conversion of testosterone into dihydrotestosterone? Potentially. Is that because they were not used to such a high testosterone concentration, and now they bring it to the top of the reference range and they get an adverse reaction because their testosterone levels are now double, triple, 4 times as much because they naturally were at the bottom of the reference range, for example. All right, there's a little bit of caution advised. And if you really must, let's say you're older and you're thinking about testosterone replacement therapy as a woman, start low as possible, and build your way up over the course of months, right? You can always increase the dose. You can drop the dose, obviously, when you get to virilization, but then it's kind of too late, right? And I would rather have you look into DHEA supplementation, which we'll discuss in the non-virilizing performance-enhancing drugs section of this video. I feel that DHEA supplementation is very beneficial to raise DHEA levels, DHEA sulfate, testosterone a little bit, and increase estradiol concentrations as a result of that as well, unless an aromatase inhibitor is used. In most cases, that's not required, as we discussed in the previous video. And usually dinyl methane and calcium diglucarate is sufficient to keep estrogen nicely balanced while DHEA supplementation is incorporated. Or when 5 milligrams of testosterone is being used 3 times per week, or even 10 milligrams testosterone. Now, some hormone replacement therapy clinics might advise 5 milligrams of testosterone gel per day. I don't really have experience with that, so I would advise you as a woman to discuss that with a hormone replacement therapy clinic. All the women that I've talked to that were on exogenous testosterone did so through the subcutaneous or intramuscular injection route. But I do know that some of the hormone replacement clinics advise testosterone gel. So that's a testosterone suspension suspended in DMSO cream, which would be applied at 5 milligrams per day on the arms, I believe, or other parts of the body which don't have so much body fat. Again, this testosterone is passing the body fat where potential for aromatization can occur. So I think that pretty much covers the compounds which I know we're a little bit all over the place. My apologies. I think that pretty much covers the compounds which are generally recommended for women, which I feel are virilizing or not safe. Again, in certain cases, it might be beneficial to go on testosterone. In certain cases, it might be beneficial to go on nandrolone, even though in a lot of women it results in a little bit of virilization. Some women are willing to accept that. Some women are not willing to accept that, and they discontinue the nandrolone right away because they might get better effects with boldenone or even Primobolan Acetate. Even though on a milligram for milligram basis, I feel that nandrolone is a little bit safer when it comes to virilization. Again, because it doesn't convert into dihydrotestosterone, or it's not a dihydrotestosterone itself, right? So really, a little bit of experimentation is required if you decide to go with the injectable route. Yeah, but in most cases, over time, there will be some virilizing side effects. So for the girls that compete in bikini or just want a bikini body or a wellness body, injectables, SARMs, most of the oral anabolic androgenic steroids, they're just off the table. Don't consider them in any way, shape, or form, because once you get virilization effects, it's a pretty long trajectory to reverse these androgenic side effects and the virilization that manifested. And again, sometimes it's so gradual that you don't even realize it's occurring. And then by the time you realize that your voice has changed, or you get clitoral growth or acne or hair growth in places that you don't want to, yeah, it might be too late. And no anti-virilization protocol is going to improve that for you. Again, I've recommended anti-virilization protocols for a couple women here in Thailand, and yeah, they're so far down the line that unfortunately it's irreversible. I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for watching. If you're looking for the most comprehensive guides to bodybuilding pharmacology, you can find the ebooks on my website, vigorsteve.com/shop. You're looking for personalized advice, you're a woman, you still have some questions, You might want to schedule a consultation. You can find the consultation rates in the consultation section on my website. Contact me directly if you're interested. Follow me on Instagram at VigorousSteve. Vigorous crew, I know you guys are still with me and you girls are still with me. You know what to do. If you already liked, no need to do it again. No need to unlike. Just leave it at 1 like. Feel free to post up another comment. Feel free to share with your female friends. Highly appreciate it. Thank you guys and girls so much for watching. And I'll see you in the next video.